Hi, everyone. I'm Shlomo Brody, the Executive Director of Ematai. Ematai is dedicated to helping Jews navigate their healthcare journey with Jewish wisdom and halacha. And part of the process of navigating this journey is preparing what you can, to plan what you can. We don't know exactly where our healthcare journey is going to take us, but it's always important to do what we can to prepare for some of the expected scenarios that are going to come up. And one of the most important things that people can do is to prepare what's known as an advanced healthcare directive or a proxy power of attorney that enables loved ones, to be family members, friends, nieces, nephews, colleagues, whoever it might be, to speak on your behalf in a situation in which you can no longer speak for yourself when it comes to healthcare decision making. This comes up for many, many people in one form or another in their lifetime when they need someone to speak on their behalf. And if you don't declare who that person should be, it creates a lot of ambiguity, a lot of strife, a lot of conflict, and a lot of indecision, which can be avoided by simply declaring and ahead of time who should speak on your behalf in such a scenario. Now, around the world, Ematai tries to help Jews with this type of process. And in places like America or Canada, there are documents which you can sort of create yourself, a do-it-yourself model in which you can designate your power of attorney or healthcare proxy. In Israel, however, like the UK, there are very specific government documents which need to be utilized in order to create a legally binding power of attorney. And so one of the things that Ematai has tried to do is to create a system, a document, a portal, which can help people do this process around the world. So if you look at our website, for example, ematai.org/netivot, you'll see all sorts of healthcare proxies that we've created in consultation with many lawyers, and social workers, and doctors and rabbis in order to make this possible in the United States, and in Canada, UK, and now in Israel. And today's presentation is going to focus on Israeli law and Israeli documents and trying to help people understand how it is that you can do this essential task of declaring who it is that should speak on your behalf, who should be your healthcare proxy. This is a tremendous gift that you're giving to your loved ones, your family members, in order to create clarity about this essential document. My colleague, Rachel Sekunda, is now going to explain the essential Israeli documents that Ematai has prepared to be utilized here in Israel. We've created bilingual documents, Hebrew and in English, which have been approved by the proper ministries in order to make this as user-friendly as possible. Rachel, take it away.
Okay, so as Rabbi Birdie said, I'm going to give an overview of the two main documents, and then he will speak some more about choosing your power of attorney, speaking with your family, and how to designate a rabbi if you would like. And just so you can see the website, if you want to download these documents, it's ematai.org/netivotil. A few important points to go over first. These documents can be completed by both citizens of Israel and people who are residents but not citizens. If you're just a resident, you can use your passport number. Everyone else will use their Teudat Zehut. We modified these documents to have a clear English translation and to be user-friendly and easy to understand, but they are otherwise the exact documents from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Justice, and they have been approved by both those ministries. And just to be clear, we are not giving legal advice today. If you have a specific personal question, we encourage you to speak with an attorney. So the first document that I'm going to speak about is called the Continuous Medical Power of Attorney Form D, or Tofes Daled. This is part of a bigger package of power of attorney documents that you can sign in Israel. There's a financial power of attorney, there are property matters. We are not speaking about those today. We are just talking about the medical power of attorney document. The remainder you can speak with your attorney about completing. So the Form D allows you to designate one or more people to serve as your power of attorney for making medical decisions if a specialist has determined that you cannot make decisions on your own. And this document is stored in the Apotropos, which is the Guardian General of the Ministry of Justice. This is just a brief image of what it looks like, so you can see there's English and Hebrew on the document. It's important to note, though, that the names and addresses must be completed in Hebrew. This is important for filing purposes, so there are no mistakes made when this is filed. You can use the English, obviously, to understand what you're completing, but please put the names and addresses in Hebrew. The majority of the rest of the document are checkboxes, so you don't have to worry about the language. There are a few places where you can put in a little bit of information about your preferences. Those spots you could write in English if you had to, but again, just the names and addresses must be in Hebrew. And it's important to note that these power of attorneys are not making end-of-life decisions. So these are just medical decisions when you have not been given a terminal prognosis, anything related to your health care and your care up until that point. The Form D is a little bit trickier to sign than the other document that we'll talk about later. It needs to be signed in the presence of a professional who's licensed in Israel, either a physician, a psychologist, a lawyer, a nurse, or a social worker. Once you have signed it with one of those people, your power of attorneys also need to sign it with a professional. It doesn't need to be done at the same time as you, but it does need to be signed in both cases by one of these professionals. And within a year of signing, you need to upload it to the Guardian General's website. This is through the mygov.il website. If you've never registered there before, it can be a little bit tricky, but on our website, we have a complete guide to how to upload your document. You have 1 year, like I said, from the date of signing. If there's an emergency in that time, they can still use the document if it hasn't been filed yet. And once you've uploaded it, it remains there indefinitely unless you cancel it. The way it's activated is if a specialist, a certain type of physician or psychologist, determines, sometimes with the assistance of an occupational therapist or a social worker, that you lack the mental capacity. The Guardian General is notified, and then the document takes effect. Now, the next document falls under the Dying Patient Act. This was a law that was passed by the Knesset to allow people to choose to request or to not choose to have any treatments done at the end of life. And therefore, they made a special power of attorney form to fit that scenario. There are actually 3 documents that were created under this umbrella. Ematai has translated just the abridged version, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. All of these documents allow you to designate one or more power of attorneys when you meet the scenario of lacking the mental capacity and being a terminally ill patient with less than 6 months to live. So the Form D document that we spoke about before is until you've been declared a dying patient or a terminally ill patient. And this document kicks in once you are given a prognosis of less than 6 months to live. Now, as I said, we only translated the abridged form of this document. This is a document that you complete in advance, meaning when you are still a healthy person without a terminal prognosis. It needs to be signed by 2 witnesses, but they do not need to be a professional. They just cannot be first-degree relatives. Otherwise, it can be your neighbors, it can be your colleagues, it can be anyone else. And similar to the Form D, you're designating someone or multiple people to make medical decisions on your behalf. And this document does leave space optionally for you to make some limited advanced directives about resuscitation and intubation at the end of life, but those sections are optional. The abridged form must be sent, the original copy, via registered mail to the Ministry of Health with a photocopy of your Teudat Zehut and Sechach or your passport. They will mail the original copy back to you about a month or 2 later with a letter confirming that they have accepted your document, and it remains valid for 5 years only. After 5 years, there is an additional document, it's about 2 pages long, that you have to complete to extend the validity of this document. You might say this sounds like a lot of work. Why do I need to fill out both these documents? What's the big deal? It's always important to have both of these filled out so that there are never any delays, any questions, any disputes about who should be making a decision in either of these scenarios. They cover different situations, and while it is possible that if one was not completed and the other one was, that the correct person would still be called upon, it's always best to have both documents completed. As I mentioned, both of them are submitted and registered with the ministries, but it's important to keep a original copy of both of them in an accessible place so that your power of attorney can access it, bring it when needed to the hospital, and have it available. A few people have asked us why we didn't do the other 2 documents from the Dying Patient Act, and There's basically a simple explanation for both of them. The abridged form is easy to complete, it allows you to designate that power of attorney, and it doesn't require any extra steps. One of the other directives is only for when you have been given a terminal prognosis. You still have the mental capacity to make your own decisions, but you need to complete that form with a specialist physician who will go through. It's an extensive list of advanced directives for that scenario. And the other one is if you're still healthy and you want to give specific directives, that also must be filled out with a physician. And for various reasons that Rabbi Brody discussed, we did not translate that form. Ultimately, we recommend completing the conversation guide with your family, with your power of attorney, so that they know your general preferences rather than making specific directives when you're healthy. So just to summarize what we recommend, please download both documents from our website. You should be electing multiple powers of attorney so that if your primary person is unavailable, there are other people to make decisions. Use our conversation guide. It's really important to speak with your power of attorney so that they haven't just been given this role without understanding what you actually want. And as Rabbi Brody will discuss, you want to speak with them about which rabbi should be turned to in times when there are halachic questions that come up.
One of the big issues that comes up is that people would like decisions to be made within the framework of Jewish law and custom. Now, here in Israel, the law that governs the dying patient law, right, these scenarios, is in many ways built around a halachic framework. It was created by a committee headed by Rabbi Professor Avram Steinberg, a member of Ematai's Rabbinic Advisory Board, that tried to create a law here in Israel that would be sensitive to the needs of the Jewish population and to the needs of halacha, of Jewish law. That said, within halacha, within Jewish law, and certainly within broader Israeli law, there's a lot of flexibility with regard to personal preference, and also when it comes to the question of, well, what exactly does Jewish law and custom require? There are many different opinions on these issues, whether it comes to nutrition and hydration, or CPR, or all sorts of other types of interventions, surgeries and dialysis and whatnot. And so one of the things that we strongly encourage people to do and to utilize in the conversation guide at the end with the notes is to include and specify who it is that you would like to be consulted with regard to Jewish law and custom. If this is something that matters to you, if you want to make sure that halacha is something which helps govern the decision-making preferences, it's critical to designate a rabbi or posek who should be consulted along with an alternative, with someone else, an alternate, someone who can be contacted, a rabbi can be reached if the first one isn't available. Who should you choose? Well, you should choose someone who is someone that you trust, a posek, a rabbi whose values you share, who's someone that you think is someone who's knowledgeable about these issues, and is a person that you would turn to if you could speak for yourself. This isn't necessarily your kid's rabbi or your neighbor's rabbi. This is someone that you decide. As we say in Hebrew, Aselach, right? Make yourself a rabbi. Create this, designate this person who can make these decisions. If you don't do this, you end up in situations where you have 4 family members that call different rabbis, and somehow they end up with at least 5 different opinions. So it's critical to clarify from the get-go who it is that should be consulted on rabbinic matters when it comes to these issues, if this is something which is important to you. One of the critical questions you need to ask is, who would you want to speak on your behalf? Now, of course, they have to be someone who is an adult, who's someone who's capable of being there in the hospital and advocating for you. One of the questions we get a lot from people, particularly Olim, is, should I choose someone who lives abroad? Well, you might have someone in your life, like a child, for example, or a sibling, who is this person who lives abroad and is really the person you want to make decisions on your behalf. And it's certainly appropriate and fine if that's really the primary person to elect such a person, to designate them as a primary power of attorney. But we strongly recommend that you make sure at least to have an alternate who lives here in Israel. The reason being is that when push comes to shove in the moment of truth, when you really need someone to be in the hospital, it's important to have someone local who is able to be here as quickly as possible. And so, in general, there's a lot of recommendations here in Israel to pick people that are local. Also, hospitals are much more likely to make local phone calls than to call abroad and to deal with these issues and to also get proper authorization. But it's certainly okay to pick someone who lives abroad as long as you also have an option who's here in Israel. Beyond that, you need to think about really the fundamental question: who will best represent your interests? The goal of the power of attorney is to do what we call substituted judgment, to speak on your behalf, to make a decision based on what they think you would want. Now, that's complicated for a lot of people because sometimes you might have a situation where there's a natural candidate or even multiple candidates who can speak on your behalf, who are the types of people you feel will well represent you and will also be strong and advocate for your beliefs, your positions when you're in the hospital. But for some people, you might have situations in which you have loved ones or family members or friends who you might care for and they care for you, but it might not see eye to eye in a lot of these issues. And so, one of the questions people have to ask is, okay, I have a certain number of people in my life. It could be children, siblings, nephews, nieces, uh, neighbors, whatever it might be. All sorts of different type of people. Who do you got in your life that you think will be best represent you? And those are the people that you should select, contingent, of course, on the fact that they want to serve as this role or are willing to serve in this role. So it's important to tell people about your choice. And we strongly recommend telling people who might think that they're going to be chosen, but weren't actually chosen as well. Why? Because if you show up in the hospital and someone has to make a decision and the hospital pulls out this document and designates person X, but not person Y might be insulted and it creates a lot of strife. So you want to create as much clarity as possible to explain to people who you want and why you've chosen them to make those decisions. Just because you've chosen a certain person to be your power of attorney doesn't mean that other people don't have a role to play. So let's say you have 3 or 4 kids and you've decided to choose your second child for whatever reason. They're more successful, they answer their phones, whatever it might be. But that doesn't mean that the other children aren't involved in the decision-making process. So it's important to clarify to your family members, to your loved ones, why it is you chose this person, the fact that you chose this person, and to also explain who the alternates will be. And of course, to keep them in mind in stressing the fact that you're doing this for their sake, for your sake and for their sake, to make sure that you avoid unnecessary strife, that there's clarity when these moments of truth have to come about and decisions have to be made. Now, the obvious question, though, that anyone should ask if they're appointed to be a power of attorney is a simple one: what would you want? But of course, that's not such a simple question because for many of us, we have a certain idea of what we'd want or wouldn't want when it comes to healthcare decisions, but we don't actually know where a healthcare journey is going to take us. We don't really understand what those decisions might be. We don't understand the medical scenarios. There's a lot of things that are up in the air. And so it's important to talk about some of your values and preferences when it comes to these issues. Here in Israel, there are options that allow you to make very specific advanced medical directives, which are legally binding directives, which will apply in a scenario in which you've been given a diagnosis of living 6 months or less. The Chok Hanotel Lamut, the dying patient law, governs these scenarios, and you're able to make very specific declarations to saying, I want X, Y, or Z done or not done in different scenarios. There's a lot of advantages to that model because it allows people to create a directive and sort of take the choice out of the hands of the power of attorney and all those types of dilemmas. On the other hand, it's a problematic decision in many ways, not just here in Israel, but around the world, because people don't necessarily understand what they're signing up for and what they're deciding. And of course, their minds could change over time in a lot of different directions. And therefore, the advanced directives are problematic because you're making a directive for a scenario which you don't necessarily understand. And so the model that we've taken here at Ematai is to say we should try to minimize the amount of advanced directives in general that people should take and instead create a conversation between you and your loved ones, between you and your family members or your powers of attorney, to discuss what are the general values and preferences that you prefer. And so, with the help of many lawyers and social workers and doctors and rabbis and poskim, we've created a document called the Ematai Conversation Guide, which is not a legal document. Instead, it is meant to facilitate open and natural conversations about these sensitive topics, relating to your general preferences and values when it comes to risk and pain tolerance and decision making preferences, and to also discuss some of your worries about social and physical independence as one ages and gets older. This is a crucial conversation which opens the door for a healthy dialogue about many of these sensitive topics. And we hear so many times from people when they have to make decisions, whether the power of attorney, and kids will call it the Ematai Medical Halacha Helpline, the Robert M. Barron Medical Halacha Helpline. And they'll call us up and say, Mom has advanced dementia. We have decisions have to be made. Dad has Parkinson's. We have decisions that we have to be made. And the first question we always ask is, well, what do you think mom or dad would have wanted? And the answer we frequently get is, we never discussed it. I'm not blaming anyone because I understand why it's difficult to talk about these matters, but it would avoid so much angst and guilt and conflict if people can talk about their general values and preferences ahead of time. And so we created this conversation guide, which is a gift to you and your loved ones to talk openly about some of your values and preferences. You don't have to write a lot of details. It's a scale where you can indicate different preferences. It's a very user-friendly document with color coding. And it also gives you an opportunity to write out a little bit of your own specific ideas or your own wishes or certain feelings that you want to make sure that people understand. It could be also sharing an experience about how a loved one died or didn't die in certain circumstances, or how they were treated, or whatever it might be. Or you can just share your general vision of a good death looks to me like X, Y, or Z, and give a little bit of an idea of this. Any form of knowledge, any form of insight, any form of indication of your values and preferences is a tremendous gift to loved ones. And at Ematai, we see all the time how families struggle with these decisions, partly because they're difficult, but largely also because they have no idea what their loved one would have wanted. And so we've created this document, and the document is even the key. It's not so critical how you complete it. You don't sign it. It's not something that is a legal document. And as much as that you utilize it to have conversations with your loved ones about your values and preferences. And people always ask us, Ematai, well, why should I do this? And I like to quote the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, which teaches, Im ena nili mili, the teaching of Hillel HaZaken, the great sage Hillel, who says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? No one else is going to take this initiative for you. This is something which you have to do in order to plan what you can and make sure there's clarity about who should make these decisions, and to notify that person about your general values and preferences. Ukshani latzmi ma'ani, the Mishnah continues to say. If I'm only for myself, what am I? If you don't have these conversations, all you're doing is kicking the can down the road and creating all sorts of situations where you're imposing on your loved ones decisions that have to be made when they haven't been given the clarity that you could have provided. And then finally, people ask me, well, when should I do this? And I always tell people the last line of the Mishnah, Im lo achshav, ematai. If not now, when? What are you waiting for? Are you waiting for a scenario in which you can no longer talk for yourself? You can no longer express your values and preferences? Are you waiting for a preventable fight from happening which you no longer can do anything about? Im lo achshav, ematai. Take the initiative today. Thank you so much for joining this presentation. Please go to Ematai's website, ematai.org, to get more information about these documents and a range of other issues relating to aging and end-of-life care.